Hello everyone and welcome to the Creative Informatics Innovation Showcase. I'm Janine Matheson, Creative Bridge Programme Lead at Codebase and part of Creative Informatics. Creative Bridge is a free 10-week programme for creatives interested in learning about startup thinking, innovation and digital product development. I'm super excited to be virtually sitting next to the lovely Dr. Anne-Marie Imafidon, MBE. I'm really honoured to have this opportunity to speak to her today. A former child prodigy, Anne-Marie was one of the youngest ever to be awarded a master's degree in mathematics and computer science by the University of Oxford at 20. She went on to work with some of the world's largest companies, including Hewlett-Packard and Deutsche Bank. In 2013, she co-founded Stemettes, an amazing award-winning social enterprise dedicated to inspiring and supporting young women and non-binary people into STEM careers, and that's science, technology, engineering, and maths. She's a respected thought leader in the tech space and a trustee at the Institute of Future of Work, Urban Development Music Foundation, and Women of the World Foundation, and is on the board of the UK government's Department of Digital Culture, Media, Sports, Digital Skills Partnership. Voted the most influential woman in tech in the UK 2020 by Computer Weekly, she also hosts the fantastic Women Tech Charge podcast, which if you haven't listened to yet, I really recommend you dive right into it. Anne-Marie is an entrepreneur, a generous leader, a speaker and activist, and throughout her work champions for a more diverse and balanced science and tech community. Welcome, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi Janine, thanks for having me here at Creative Informatics. Really excited to virtually be in Edinburgh.
In the Har.
Yes, it's as good as I'm going to get at the moment. So I'm breathing it in. I'm visualizing myself literally in Edinburgh right now.
Well,
The castle above me somewhere. Yeah.
the Innovation Showcase is about celebrating innovation across the creative industries. In your work and through the Women in Tech Charge podcast, you've spoken with some really amazing pioneering creatives who are harnessing kind of technology to reimagine and reinvent the future. I really loved the conversation you had at the end of the year with singer-songwriter Imogen Heap, who was kind of describing about how she was making these amazing wearable musical instrument gloves. I wondered, could you talk to us a little bit about what you think the future holds for tech-driven creativity?
So for me, I'm very excited about what the future holds for tech-driven creativity because I think we are going through this time where more and more folks are having access to technical tools that they can use to express themselves. They can use to extend their art. They can use to extend their creativity. And so it used to be, there's the chats I had with Imogen. There's chats I've had with lots of different folks over the years about, one person that we work with quite a lot, Glenn Boddington, who runs Body Data Space. She was a dancer, and it's so interesting to hear about in the 90s and in the 80s how they were having kind of virtual dance performances with one person in one room and another person in another room. And, they weren't even using the internet for this. This was kind of broadcast cabling that they were using, and the amount of effort that she had and the people that she had to involve, where now we've got so many no code, low code, free, accessible tools and platforms that folks can use that, it's been created for one use. And actually in the hands of a ceramicist or in the hands of Imogen Heap or in the hands of whoever it might be, that thing takes on a completely new use case, a completely new form of expression. And so you have, like we see in the maker spaces, you have people literally, hacking things, sometimes even hacking themselves. And so I'm super excited to see, as we mature into that a little bit more, and we have that wider access, the problems that we can solve by people doing the most random of things. That's what I'm really excited to see. I'm really excited to see, what the future holds for growing levels of expression. It's almost like, you had cavemen drawing on cave walls, right? And what that was able to do and how that was able to communicate something to someone that wasn't there, right? What are we going to see now that we are able to add these things together, and they'll definitely be greater than the sum of their parts. So I'm really excited. I think I'm most excited though for the problems that will be solved as a result of us having those kind of cool collaborations, those unobvious things that are coming together. So I'm excited to see the problems that will be solved the most, and I'm also excited to see how that's going to develop and transform fields in a way that we haven't seen yet. So what does that mean for sculpture? What does that mean for music? What does that mean for any of the other kind of things that we traditionally have thought are very analog and very unconnected to technology? What will that mean for those fields and the progress that they can have, and the beauty and expression that we'll be able to have as a result of those collabs?
Yeah, I think I'm completely excited in the same way. I think creatives by nature, they experiment, they tinker, and I think what's exciting to see is how people are using that to create kind of new revenue streams to sustain their practice, or kind of new tools that, like you say, can be accessible to everybody. So yeah, it's very, very exciting. Do you think there are any? Do you see any kind of challenges coming up in terms of innovation within the creative industries?
Definitely. I think and it's so interesting what you said there about tinkering. I think one of the biggest challenges I see is, when folks are tinkering and when folks are exploring, a big challenge I see is that we still have a kind of elitism, or we still have some sense of hierarchy where you see computer scientists, or you see folks that are maybe on the more traditional side having some sort of, no, well, if you don't know that, or if you didn't know that, or you must know these basics to be able to do this. And I think, and this is why I talk so much about diversity and about including different folks in this scene, and including different folks in that idea of having digital literacy, where I think we're not valuing the differences. We're not valuing the differences in perspectives. We're not valuing, actually, there might be loads of things that you do as a creative that it's not immediately obvious, but those are real great principles that, when applied on the computer science side, or applied by scientists, or applied by engineers, could even enrich their practice. And so what I'm fearful of, or what I'm hoping doesn't hold us back too much, is our existing hierarchies, our existing kind of elitism, our existing, this is what's important for folks to know in this space. And if you don't know this, then you're not a whatever. And I feel like that has been quite a big barrier to innovation thus far, kind of locking people out and people feeling like it's not something that's accessible for them, even though it physically is, not feeling comfortable in different spaces, not feeling like they've got the right kinds of environments to explore and to tinker and to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. So I think, that's something that at the moment is still challenging us on innovation, this idea of being able to do things wrong, or being able to do them differently, and still knowing that there will be value, or there could be value at the end of doing things the wrong way or using it the wrong way. So yeah, that's definitely something that worries me the most, because that is definitely limiting our capacity for innovation.
Yeah, I what you were saying about kind of making mistakes, and not being afraid to make mistakes, because the best ways of learning and actually pushing through to discover new things is actually by iterating and changing things as you go.
Mm.
I know that a lot of people that are going to be listening are maybe at the start of their creative journey, or they're developing a new product or a new business, and there can be very high highs and quite low lows, and you've had a very successful career. I wondered if you could share a bit on the flip side of what things have been hard, and or what do you find hard, and can you share any fun?
What don't I find hard? I think funnily enough, the computer science and the maths were the easiest thing, and everything else since then. I mean, I have to say, you need the downs to have the ups, which is always the thing that you kind of hold on to. But what hasn't gone wrong, from mistakes on just the mechanics of business, right, to not dating invoices, so someone pays you a year later at the original price because that was what you agreed, that was what was on paper, to not setting up the Eventbrite correctly and no one turning up for the event, or there's there's constantly downs, whether it's being rejected for funding or for grants, whether it's sometimes you're like, this is the 10th mistake. What am I learning? Why is this not happening? Why is this not working? I mean, I always say for me, the biggest downs actually are around people and working with people, and it's not even necessarily a down for us or for me as an entrepreneur, but it's the downs for them and the impacts that then has on my supply chain, or then that has on my clients, or that has on the young people that we're trying to work with. So I think for me, the downs are many, they are plentiful. As well as being an entrepreneur, you're a human being, right? And so there's all the things that can happen aside from a pandemic. You've got family, you've got friends, sometimes you've got living, sometimes you don't. And so I think it's one of those things where you do have to build up that resilience. You do have to end up rolling with the punches, and you do end up having to kind of start to try to protect your safe space. Make sure that you're psychologically safe for a lot of what you're going through, which is why I think having the cluster that you're involved with is fantastic for giving people an ecosystem, giving people a community, giving people some kind of safety net, at least a psychological or a social safety net, to say, when you do get these punches, when you are in the down times, you're not alone. There are other people that are there. And you have to have that idea of serendipity, and you're always one chance encounter away from the up, right? And heading back up on the up. So yeah, I mean, daily ups and downs, daily. Not all of them even necessarily just for me, they're for people in my team and in my sphere, and like I said, in our supply chain. So there's always ups and downs, but I think you have to. I think that's the thing about being creative is, often you have the vision, you have where you're going, roughly what is going to be magical, and you everything else kind of, that's where you're heading for. So you have that as your kind of North Star, and you're like, this is what I'm doing it for. With us and the young people, it's always, I know what impact this is going to have on them when we get this right. I know the impacts we're having as we're learning, and so that's what's going to keep me going through the downs to those ups. But I think it's also, being creative, that if you can trust in your process, you have a process that you can trust in, right? As you're starting, there's a reason why you're here. There's, like I said, the vision, there's the change that you want to see. And I think often being able to cling to that will help you kind of maintain some sort of stability, if we can call it that. Not really stability, maintain sanity as you head in the direction that you're trying to go to.
I completely echo a lot of that. I really loved how you were talking about the ecosystem around you, and one of the parts of your work that I really admire is your work around Stemettes and what you're doing to kind of encourage and inspire young people. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you're most excited about?
Sure. So Stemettes is my social enterprise that I run. We started 8 years ago. We've worked with more than 50,000 girls, young women, non-binary young people, and a few boys along the way over those 8 years. And we are all about inspiring and supporting young people into STEM, into science, technology, engineering, and maths. And for us, STEAM is quite a big focus. In fact, you can't really do STEM without STEAM properly. And so we run intersectional long-term cohort programs. We run impactful short-term events, and then we have our inspirational content platforms. And our ethos is everything we do is free to attend. It's always fun, and there's always food, which has been challenging in a pandemic, but we got there, getting folks food at home. But for us, our work all centers on allowing these young people to almost suspend reality, suspend the conditioning that they might have got from society, from their peers, from their influences, from their parents, from their teachers, on what it is to be a technical person and who has technical capabilities. And so we work with the girls and the young people as young as 5 all the way up to 25 to show them the options that they have in STEM, to show them what's possible, to kind of improve their perception and show them kind of, it's not just what you see in the movies, but also their awareness of the options that it gives them. And actually, becoming a computer scientist doesn't mean that you are purely, that character from Ocean's 11 or Ocean's 8 even, or that you're, purely a hacker sat in the dark with a cat. But actually, there's so many things that you can do as a computer scientist, and there's so many things you can do not as a computer scientist that involve computer science. And actually it's about the addition, like we're saying, and like lots of folks listening will know, it's when those things cross over, it's the cross-disciplinary appreciation and knowing that there's something there for you if you want to pursue it and giving them a good reason for it. So there's that. And as you mentioned, it is the ecosystem, it is the network, it's the peers, it's the mentors, it's the role models. And it's the support that we're able to give, but also that we're empowering the young people to give each other, right? So there's a peer network, if they're the only one in their physics A-level class, they come and they meet all the other girls who are the only ones in their physics A-level class, and then you no longer feel so lonely in it, right? You've got that network, you've got those people to rely on, you've got people to share challenges with, and you've got people to share successes with. And so that's what we're doing with Stemettes. And what I'm really excited about is that we started this last October half term, or the one before actually. Gosh, time is flying now that there's a pandemic and we're at home. But we started offering certifications to young people. And for me, this is something that is very exciting personally, because as you mentioned, I did all these things really early in GCSEs and A levels and whatever. And it's always like, oh, she's the wunderkind, she's the child prodigy, she's the only one that could have ever done it. And she's so special and she's so amazing. And I've always known, no, I had the right opportunities at the right time, and I'm not really that amazing. And so it's been great to kind of almost grow another generation of folks who are just as amazing, but they're all doing it together, and they're doing their cyber certifications, they're doing agile certifications, they're doing Python certifications as teenage young women, teenage non-binary folk who are kind of doing this at home during a pandemic, and they're again building up their network, they're working through these exercises together, they're getting those certifications, and they're making empowered decisions about what happens next for them. So yeah, I mean, and they're eating free food along the way, which is important because you need a full belly to do some really good work. So yeah.
I guess kind of like moving into that a bit deeper, I suppose another side of that, women in technology is quite underrepresented. So having that diversity of thought that, coming into our the tech industry is really exciting. It can make quite a lot of changes. Can you tell us why it's so important that there should be diversity of thought within our tech industry?
I mean, why is it so important? We need the diversity because technology is important, and it's too important to leave to just one part of society. I think that's the long and the short of it. I think technology is power, right? Having that tool, it's a form of agency, having this digital literacy in a world where we have algorithms making decisions, in a world where technology allows you to subvert a lot of existing power structures and get your message out, or allows you to create things that you've dreamt up without having to go through a gatekeeper or through someone that has all the things that you don't have. And so having women in particular in this space is very, very important, because the decisions that are being made affect all of us, right? We've progressed a little bit on from, when I was at university, I did maths and computer science, and we'd be in the labs and we'd be making these things and we'd be tinkering and we'd be like, that's cool, wouldn't it be cool if we made that? And now it's no, like when you make that thing and you build this company and you release it out there, it's not just about you and tinkering and playing. This is real life. So, there's a real responsibility we have to use that power and wield it correctly and do it properly. And if you're missing the perspectives of half of the population, who make 85% of purchasing decisions, who probably gave birth to you, how would that be a perspective that you want to miss out on? You're limiting the success of what you're going to create if you forget that some people menstruate sometimes, or some people are pregnant sometimes, or some people have longer hair. There's all these things that if you forget they exist. I mean, I always give the example, and if anyone's read Invisible Women, Caroline Crowder-Perez, the author, talks about this it kind of goes into this in detail. But early teams of engineers working on seatbelts and airbags forgot that women existed, and so early seatbelts and airbags killed women and children, which was not the point of that as a safety device. But even now, I've never used a seatbelt correctly in my life because our safety standards are still based on the 50th percentile male. I'm never going to be 50th percentile male. That's not really what I'm aiming for. I don't know, Janine, is that something that you're wanting to do? And this is a safety where seatbelts are by law, you have to wear seatbelts, and it's still, I've never used one correctly. And so it's that, why do we want to repeat that going forward? Why is that something we want? Why is that something that future generations deserve? But also, why is that a limit you want to put on your creativity? Why wouldn't you want to have those perspectives to enrich what you're doing? The same way as you're a creative, bringing the tech together, why wouldn't you want to bring those differences of experience into your creation and into the vision that you have? And so, we can say there's the business case and you make more money if you have more women there, which is true, and but really it's the right thing to do. It's the best thing to do. And it's actually irresponsible to not have that proper representation of society there if you're building tech for society. So that's why we need that diversity. And it's not just gender, it's all the protected characteristics, and it's really interesting. We talk about neurodivergence now as well, and you've got to think, if you're not able to have difference there in outwardly appearances, how are you going to have it for things that are more internal and things that are less easy to spot, right? If you can't do it with the easy things of, I can see that's a slightly different person, that person's got a different skin color, or that person's got a different ethnicity, or that person's got a different accent. If you're not able to do that, what makes us think that we're going to be able to kind of do that with the things that are more nuanced and that are harder to spot? And so I think it is really important for us to make sure we've got the right reflections, especially as technology is becoming so much more of the seat of power.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a little bit about machine learning actually in that, and I just wanted to kind of go a wee bit deeper about artificial intelligence and machine learning, about having different perspectives in developing that technology. Could you talk a little bit around, you've sort of talked a wee bit about the responsibility, that kind of ethics and the moral responsibility that you have, but could you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it's important, and I think when we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about machine learning in particular. Within all of that, I think when we talk about responsibilities, there's also something where we have to consider. And data, I know, is kind of is it right for this cluster, and I think we do have to be really honest with ourselves and have to really consider, if we're talking about making decisions based off data, and when we consider the nature of data, right? Data isn't fully objective, right? It's collected a certain way by a certain person who had a particular thing in mind when they set up that data capture mechanism, right? Whether it was the census, even examples, even down to examples like when you get married, it's just changed. The laws just changed. So if anyone here has got married before this year, when you go and you fill in the register, you've filled in your father's occupation, but you've not filled in your mother's occupation, right? So that's the whole data set we have. There was a decision that was made to say mother's occupations weren't important. And so if we're gonna use this data to then scale up and make decisions, multiple decisions a minute or a second or a millisecond or whatever it might be, there is a responsibility to also look back and say, okay, cool, if that's the data we're based off, how is that impacting the decisions that we're able to make with that data? What are the assumptions that are baked into the data sets that we're using, but also us that are building these things to make these decisions? And how are we making sure that we're not magnifying the errors and the mistakes and the things that we're missing from before? This is something we do and kind of look at quite a lot at the Institute for the Future of Work, where, if we look at the use of these algorithms in the workplace, which is what we do at the Future of Work, if you're using that data, if you're compounding lots of different ones to, for example, manage a workforce, which is something that's happening a lot more now because of the pandemic. People are distributed working. We're using a lot more technology now to collect a lot more data on folks at work. If you're going to use that then to make decisions like their shifts or their pay or their promotion, you better make sure that the algorithm and the thing that you're using is improving what it was, and improving the way you're making those decisions, rather than repeating them, because we all know the kind of biases that we would have had, or even making those decisions and making worse decisions, right? Which we've allowed it to do because it's the algorithm that uses the magical data that's objective and has no flaws. And we saw we did a couple of case studies a couple of years ago, and saw in this particular place where they were using this algorithm to manage shift, they were using facial recognition technology as well to kind of track folks, and this was retail folks on the shop floor, and it ended up giving certain people a particular shift pattern, giving others a much more dramatic changes in their shift patterns, which wasn't really workable, which then impacted their pay, which then impacted their promotion. And we actually saw that particular demographics then were less likely to get a promotion and were more likely to have shifts that kind of didn't really fit well together, because the algorithm, the data that had been fed in, didn't even recognize that they were two different people. It thought they were the same person. And so the facial recognition algorithm had completely thrown everything out of whack. And you've got to think, there are always going to be these implications. Like, there are always going to be knock-on effects when we're not careful and we don't take that responsibility. And in something like the workplace, there are laws that govern the way that we manage people, the laws that govern the way that we pay. There's a whole Equalities Act that we have, and that, the people who develop this algorithm, they have a different one in their country, and so they had different assumptions. And so I think it's really, really important for us to consider, not just clean up your data and do your, have the right data, which is a whole thing in itself, but also what are you using it for? And where are you as a human that has the intelligence that you're training into your algorithm? Where are you applying that intelligence to see how you use the algorithm, how you're using that data, and the nature of the problems that you're trying to solve? So there's lots there. I mean, we probably don't have enough time to kind of cover it in the right kind of depth that I'd like to, but I think it is really important for us to think, to be really, to think through these things, and be, as you mentioned earlier, iterative in our approach, to audit what we're doing and to make sure that we've got the right people around the table to help us question these things as we start them out. And just because you can build something doesn't mean you should. And so I think that's the other thing that we do have to consider and think, this is about making something cool, but as we release it out, are we releasing a Frankenstein? Are we releasing a Terminator 2? Or are we improving the situation? And it's a very fine line. The speed at which some of this is going is a really fine line. So it's something that you have to consider from the beginning. You have to build into your design, look for the best practice, look for the auditing, do your impact assessments, do the work in addition to the creativity. That we need some of those constraints to kind of help us with the innovation, right? So take that in, add it, and build something that is definitely going to do better, rather than something that's going to create problems. So let's try and solve problems rather than creating new ones.
I was going to ask, thank you for sharing that. I think it's really interesting around data capturing and how we use data. It's obviously something that we're exploring within the Creative Informatics programme. There'll be a lot of creatives watching this, and researchers and businesses that really want to know more. Is there anyone that you would recommend people should follow, or any newsletters people should sign up? What kind of actions could people take?
Oh, there's loads. I think it's something that once you start looking, you won't be able to stop. I mean, the not just because I'm their trustee, but it is really useful. The Institute for Future of Work does have a really good newsletter roundup that I think comes out. I think it's I sit down and read it monthly, of the latest thinking, but also kind of the things that we're spotting and the trends that we're seeing in the future of work in particular. I mean, if anyone hasn't read Invisible Women and you're working in data, what are you doing? I think that's definitely something. And I know Caroline has her own newsletter as well. But I think actually, rather than, I think there's the kind of the initial set of things that you might look into, but I think it is something that folks should try and again have an iterative process for. So how are you diversifying? There's a great tool from Deloitte actually, just kind of diversify your feed, the kind of, and auditing what you're doing on social media and the information you're getting in. But I think it is also something for folks to start to read and start to look into and start to subscribe things that maybe are for a slightly different audience. So something I do mention to folks quite a lot is you've got outlets like Black Ballad and Galdem that, for example, are focusing on the experience of people of colour or Black women in particular, and actually being able to see the news and the same articles or the same concepts covered from a completely different perspective can start to open your eyes to understand the difference that you might need to consider as you're creating. And it's fantastic input. So I think you want a magpie, and I think you're in your professional development, however, whatever form that takes, I think you definitely want to build up and curate your own set of, I'm looking for difference. I'm looking for people that I don't agree with, as well as people I do agree with, but I'm also looking to see the different perspectives on the problem that I'm trying to solve, or on the creativity that I'm trying to have. And I think too often we can kind of end up just looking for folks that look like us, or looking for folks that agree with us, or looking for folks that are in the same space, whereas actually the magic happens just outside your comfort zone in in those spaces where actually it's not necessarily centered on you, but there's a lot of insight and there's a lot of empathy and understanding that you can build from reading in those different spaces. So sorry. I mean, I've also got a book coming out, which I should really mention for my PR person, called She's in Control, that is about understanding how do you curate those different things? How do you understand the privileges that you have? And how do you look to try and counter that in the information that you digest and the things that you take in? But you know, we're really fortunate here in the UK to have data as part of our industrial strategy, right? So there are a lot of outlets, a lot of spaces to be learning from, whether it is the ODI, whether it is the Alan Turing Institute, whether it is the Ada Lovelace Institute. I know is looking into lots of this. So, you know, there's a lot. I think the question is more, you know, how are you going to form the habits to allow you to process all this information rather than where are you going to find it from? Because yeah, once you start, you just can't stop. It's like Pringles, this whole way. And I think that's the exciting thing about it. Sorry. I think that's the exciting thing about it is we're in our early stages on this. We're in early phases on this. The rest is still unwritten. So there is quite a big opportunity actually to come in and to think about these things and to lay down, you know, the good practice, lay down the best practice, lay down the ideas that could serve us or that should serve us for generations on this wild west of data that we seem to be in at the moment. Oh, Coded Bias is also a fantastic documentary if you haven't seen it on Netflix. So kind of AI and regulation and what we should be doing and this idea of kind of using this to subvert power structures. So that's the other recommendation I'll give actually. Coded Bias.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing all those resources. I think, like you say, you can start looking in one place and it kind of opens up a whole host of things, but it's always really interesting to hear from an expert what they would recommend kind of looking at. So I think we've maybe got time for one last question. I watched a really brilliant conversation that you had recently with Upfront co-founder Lauren Curry about sharing your power and privilege, and it kind of echoes a few things that we've talked about today. But I just wanted you to talk a little bit about like what does sharing your power look like for you, so you can so we can be inspired and activate our power as well.
Sure. So sharing your power, I think it's an interesting one, especially if you've never thought about the privileges that you have, if you've never considered the agency that you have and that you've been able to explore, even by, you know, being on a program like this and being able to engage with it, you know, even at a time when there's a pandemic, you know, there's a lot of agency, there's a lot of kind of your own choices that you're able to make. And then the final piece for me that I'm still learning, still grappling with, which I definitely mentioned to Lauren, is, you know, you have a sphere of influence, which I think folks, if you're not a leader, if you're not a CEO already, right, or if you're just stepping into it, sometimes it can feel a little bit like, yes, I'm now the boss, right? I have the power and I do the leadership things, whereas actually, you know, we all have agency, we all have power, we all have a sphere of influence. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a professional sphere of influence. It can be with your nieces and your nephews and, you know, the people in your community. It can be with your parents. It can be with your friends. But normally, actually, we've got something slightly wider. There will be people in your workplace or people in your ecosystem who, when you speak, they listen. And so when talking about sharing your power and sharing your agency, I think it's really important for folks to understand the privileges that they do have, and so the people that they can speak on behalf of without losing out. And this is something that we kind of talk about quite a lot in this space when we talk about kind of folks that are underprivileged. Let's say folks who might have come from a working class background, for example. There are certain scenarios and spaces that they might find themselves in where they're having to hide, they're having to cloak, they're having to minimize who they are. And you almost feel as if, you know, if you speak out against something, if you mention something, if you call something out, you'll be punished and you'll be doubled down. And so you can't necessarily represent all the working class people in that space because you're trying to hold on to your seat, let alone fighting for others, right? And I think it's really important for folks to understand their privilege where, you know, there are certain rooms that I can go in, there's certain rooms that you can go into, Janine, where if we speak and we say something, we call it out, we won't be punished, right? It's something that doesn't, you know, I've got the power, I've got the agency, I've got the influence. That means that I can sit here and I can say X, Y, and Z, or I can say any of the things I've already said without knowing that that's not going to backfire on me, or that's not going to materially affect my position and my ability to feed myself and look after myself. And so sharing your privilege and sharing your power is about saying, okay, cool. I might be, for example, a white man in this space. I might still be working class, but I'm a white man, which means that there are scenarios that I am in, there are meeting rooms that I can be in, there is a certain way I'm treated when I go into spaces. And so if I then know that there's someone else that's not allowed into that space or that isn't able to flourish, I'm able to share my power, share my agency, share my influence and say, do you know what? I'm going to suggest this person to be a speaker because I know it's not something you would have said. There's a certain type of person that you pick as a speaker. But I'm going to say, I'm going to use my privilege, I'm going to share my power, and I'm going to say, I'm going to bring that person in. And there's a form of allyship as well that's involved in that. So it's being able to step into the gap for folks who don't necessarily have that privilege, don't have that power, don't have that agency, aren't able to be as comfortable in the spaces that you're in. And where it costs you nothing. It costs you nothing to suggest that person as a speaker. If they come in and they're not great, it wasn't you speaking. So it literally, there's nothing to lose, but there's a lot for that person to gain in you making that suggestion, in you quoting them, in you crediting them, in you amplifying their work, in you funding them, in you buying their product, in you subscribing to their outlet. There's a lot that you can do that actually is quite powerful for others and that doesn't actually require as much from you because of the position of privilege or the amount of influence or the agency or the power that you have. And so it's something that I'm constantly trying. I mean, everything I do is, how can I go into that space in HE, and how can I say all the things that folks want to say but can't say because they're afraid that they will lose their funding or that their supervisor will start to treat them even worse than they're already treating them. And so for me, that is always something I'm constantly, I have my finger in all these pies, and it's like, it's because I can put my finger in that pie and I will still be able to pay my mortgage at the end of the month. And I can stir those things and I can actually improve them, where we now have more than 25 Black female professors in the UK. Like, that's something I can definitely go in and shake it up. And I'm not going to lose my professorship because I'm not a professor. Where them speaking up or them making these suggestions is definitely going to be immediately detrimental to their career. So sharing your power, sharing your privilege is about looking for opportunities to do that. But it doesn't always have to be about shaking the table. Often it can be in just the thing that you build. We've had this for ages in accessibility ramps in buildings, and that's someone that made that decision, and that's allowed folks that are living with disabilities to then access those spaces. And so I think it's something about the products that you build, the innovations that you have, and how you're inclusive in your innovation, that you do consider that some people might be pregnant when they're using it. And so what can you build in to make this an okay thing for them to use whilst they're pregnant? Or some people might, and you can think of all the differences that we have from our default norm, from our 50th percentile male, right? Someone could have stepped in and said, actually, the physiology, the biology of women means that seatbelt isn't really going to go flat on their chest, because that's just not a thing that happens for a lot of women. So what can we do? And, I'm talking to you in 2021 and we still haven't thought about it. We still haven't shared our power with women so they can use seatbelts that work for them.
Thank you for sharing those examples. I think especially with the audience that's watching, there's a lot of people that are thinking, what can they do from today a bit differently, or like you say, go into that meeting with that in mind, that self-awareness, and especially within the creative industries, I think there's quite a lot of quite interesting and quite innovative ways that we can think about this as well. So thank you very much for sharing.
You're the creative, so I'm just seeding these things in. I'm sure you've all got better answers than I've got for a lot of these problems that we're facing, especially the seatbelt. Wouldn't that be great if we reinvented the seatbelt in Edinburgh in 2021?
There's someone out there.
I believe in you. I genuinely do.
I think that's all we've got time for it, but a really great place to close. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for generously sharing all these insights and some recommendations as well. A lot of food for thought. We've covered a lot in a short space of time. What the future might look like for creatives in terms of data-driven innovation and AI, and what responsibilities we have, and also how everyone can play a part in how we make this space more diverse and inclusive. I'd like to thank everyone for who's been tuning in. Thanks for joining us. Thank you again to Anne-Marie. It's been wonderful to have this time to talk to you. We're going to be taking questions live from our lovely audience next in the chat. So yeah, thank you.